For decades, Rick Rude's story seemed settled, but resurfaced footage is about to rewrite everything fans thought they knew.
Rick was dangerous.
No, that's one thing I think a world champion should do, is leave his life open to the public.
But it appears Rick's life wasn't as open as he claimed, as buried truths are now surfacing. And when his footage reached those closest to him, what they shared was truly eye-opening. The shocking footage. For years, Rick Rude was remembered through a single carefully edited lens: the arrogance, the swagger, the infamous persona that dominated wrestling television. Fans thought they understood the man because they understood the character, but that understanding was incomplete. The resurfaced footage doesn't show the version of Rick Rude the cameras wanted. It captures quiet moments, unguarded reactions, and decisions that were never meant to be seen. And once those moments are placed back into the timeline, the official story begins to fall apart. Stories that the world believed for a very long time. There are certain names in professional wrestling that, when spoken aloud, immediately conjure images of undeniable charisma, unmatched physicality, and a presence so commanding that even decades after their final match, fans still speak of them in hushed, reverent tones. Richard Irwin Rude, known to millions around the world as Ravishing Rick Rude, was precisely that kind of performer. But what the cameras captured during his legendary career only told half the story. The other half, well, that's where things get complicated, controversial, and in many ways, deeply tragic. In January of 2025, a piece of footage from 1997 resurfaced on social media that would reignite conversations about one of wrestling's most enigmatic figures. The clip, posted by a user on X, garnered over 18 million views and sparked widespread controversy about the treatment of women in professional wrestling during that era. But to truly understand why this footage matters, why it changes everything, we need to go back to the very beginning to realize who Rick Rude really was, both inside the squared circle and out. Born on December 7, 1958, in the small town of St. Peter, Minnesota, Rick Rude grew up in an environment that would prove to be a veritable breeding ground for professional wrestling talent. The Robbinsdale area, where Rude spent his formative years, produced an almost absurd number of future wrestling stars. Names like Tom Zenk, Nikita Koloff, the Berserker, and perhaps most significantly, Curt Hennig, who would go on to achieve immortality as Mr. Perfect. Rude and Hennig weren't just contemporaries, they were close friends, their bond forged in the hallways of Robbinsdale High School and strengthened through years of shared ambition. But even before Rick Rude ever stepped foot inside a wrestling ring, his reputation as someone you absolutely did not want to cross was already firmly established. His father, Richard Clyde Rude, was a Golden Gloves boxer, and that fighting spirit clearly passed down to his son. The younger Rude was, by all accounts, a scrapper of the highest order. After graduating from high school, Rude earned a degree in physical education from Anoka Ramsey Community College. But the traditional career path wasn't calling to him. Instead, he found himself working as a bouncer and competing as an arm wrestler, pursuits that allowed him to channel his natural physicality and competitive nature. It was during this period that he worked at a bar called Grandma B's in northeast Minneapolis, alongside some individuals who would become wrestling royalty.
It was myself, Rick Rude, both the Road Warriors, and then there was a few other guys after that. We all worked at that bar, and we were all powerlifting and training and, you know, in good shape and everything, and we used to throw guys out the front door of the bar.
Out of all that gang that you worked at Grandma B's with, who would you say was the toughest?
Out of us four?
The bouncers that turned into wrestlers.
Probably Rick Rude was probably the toughest out of our bunch, and because he wasn't scared of nothing.
That fearlessness, that absolute refusal to back down from anyone or anything would become one of Rick Rude's defining characteristics throughout his career. But it wasn't just toughness that set him apart. There was something almost animalistic about his approach to confrontation.
It was, you know, all of us other guys, we might have been tougher, I don't know, but you know, I wasn't a fighter, Animal wasn't a fighter, but you know, if somebody wanted to fight you, you fought.
Right.
But Rick was a different kind of a guy. He was almost like a pit bull.
Eventually, the call of professional wrestling proved too strong to ignore. Rude trained under legendary promoter Eddie Sharkey, the same man who trained his childhood friend Curt Hennig. And on December 1st, 1982, he made his professional wrestling debut as Ricky Rude, a fresh-faced babyface jobber who was, at that point, just another young hopeful trying to make a name for himself in the cutthroat world of professional wrestling. His early years were spent bouncing around various national wrestling Wrestling Alliance territories, paying his dues in places like Vancouver's All-Star Wrestling, Georgia Championship Wrestling, and the Continental Wrestling Association in Memphis. It was in late 1984, under the management of Jimmy Hart and later Percy Pringle III, who would later become known to wrestling fans as Paul Bearer, that Rick Rude finally found the character that would define his career, the ravishing heel persona, a cocky, womanizing bodybuilder whose custom airbrush tights became as iconic as his trademark hip swivel. The transformation was remarkable. Here was a man who had the physique of a Greek god, the arrogance of a Hollywood leading man, and the in-ring ability to back up every boastful word that came out of his mouth. In Florida Championship Wrestling, he captured the NWA Florida Southern Heavyweight Championship twice and won tag team gold alongside Jesse Barr. His feuds with legends like Jerry the King Lawler, King Kong Bundy, and Wahoo McDaniel established him as both a technical powerhouse and a showman of the highest caliber.
Well, I can remember when they first started doing the ravishing Rick Rude deal, and he was really self-conscious at first. But then I tell you, the guy got into it and would drive the women crazy. I mean, but I remember he had like a waist of a wasp. You know, he had a big chest and a little, you could almost put your arms around his waist. He was a great athlete and drove the women wild with that ravishing deal.
By 1987, Rick Rude had caught the attention of the biggest wrestling promotion in the world, the World Wrestling Federation. He debuted on July 15, 1987, as part of Bobby Heenan's legendary stable, and almost immediately became one of the company's top heels. His signature Rude Awakening neckbreaker and his tradition of kissing female fans after matches made him one of the most hated and secretly beloved villains in WWF history. But it was his feud with Jake the Snake Roberts that truly cemented his status as a main event talent. The rivalry was sparked by Rude's on-air insults toward Roberts' wife Cheryl, including the audacious move of airbrushing her face on his tights for SummerSlam 1988. It was provocative, it was personal, and it was exactly the kind of heat-generating storyline that made Rick Rude invaluable to the WWF. The pinnacle of his WWF run came at WrestleMania 5 on April 2, 1989, when Rude defeated the Ultimate Warrior to capture the WWF Intercontinental Heavyweight Championship with assistance from Bobby Heenan. Although he lost the title back to Warrior at SummerSlam that same year, his position as one of the top talents in the company was secure, or so it seemed. Behind the curtain. What the millions of fans watching at home never knew, what they couldn't have known, was that the ravishing Rick Rude they saw on their television screens was, in many ways, a complete fabrication. Not the wrestling ability, of course. That was very real. Not the toughness. We've already established that Rick Rude was legitimately one of the most dangerous men in any locker room he entered. What was fabricated was the persona itself, the womanizing, the arrogance, the casual cruelty. In reality, Rick Rude was a devoted family man and devout Christian. He was married twice, first to Cheryl Holler from 1976 to 1982, and then to Michelle Rude in 1988, with whom he remained until his death. Together, they had 3 children, Richard Jr., Marissa, and Colton. And here's a detail that speaks volumes about the man behind the character. Rick Rude famously refused to remove his wedding ring during matches, instead taping over it, a gesture that peers like Bret Hart noted as a symbol of his unwavering loyalty to his family. He even talked about a time when Rick threw a birthday party for his kid, with all the children having fun. This was the real Rick Rude, a father so dedicated to making his child's birthday party perfect that he would curse out a costume performer for being late during a thunderstorm. It's a far cry from the sleazy, self-absorbed villain who gyrated his hips and insulted audience members' wives on national television. But in the professional wrestling business, the lines between character and reality often blur in dangerous ways, and Rick Rude's intensity, that pit bull mentality that made him so effective as a performer, also made him someone that certain colleagues learned to fear.
Is it true that he was fairly intense in the ring?
Oh yeah, he was wound pretty tight, man. Rick was dangerous.
Is that why Hogan never wrestled him?
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, that and he knocked out Dizzy a couple of times. Which was pretty funny.
There were incidents backstage, moments where Rude's refusal to be disrespected manifested in physical confrontations. The most famous of these involved the Ultimate Warrior, with whom Rude had some of his most memorable matches.
Is it true that there was once an incident backstage with him and the Ultimate Warrior where he kind of snapped off on the Ultimate Warrior?
He did it with a couple of different people. You know, Rick's a very honorable guy. You know, in wrestling, you know, he'd take care of you, expect you to take care of him, and he wanted to have the best match of the night. And that's kind of how all of us guys from Robbinsdale were. It was, you wanted to steal the show. And if something wasn't your way, I mean, you get upset about it.
But perhaps the most telling story about Rick Rude's character comes from an incident involving Jake Roberts' wife. And no, not the storyline incident with the airbrushed tights. This was something far more real and far more revealing.
Well, I came out of rehab, and they thought it was a good idea, maybe to have my wife travel with me, to get me back on my feet and get me back to used to being on the road. And, you know, it wasn't a good idea because number one, my wife did not want to be on the road. Number two, she did not want to be in front of a camera. And number three, guys, if you want to save your marriage, don't take your wife on the road because unfortunately your wife sees too much.
Jake explained that his wife was exposed to seeing other wrestlers behave inappropriately with women, and complicating matters further, she was friends with many of them. He said those men showed no concern and seemed to expect him to stay silent and keep her quiet. He also admitted that he tried to do exactly that, telling her not to get involved and to stay out of their business. However, doing so caused serious misunderstandings, making his wife question his actions and ultimately leading to significant problems in their relationship. One major incident that had everyone talking was a surprising incident involving Rick Rude. During an argument, Jake's wife slapped Rude, and afterward, Rude jokingly told him that his wife hit harder than he did, adding that she had actually ruptured his eardrum. The fact that Jake Roberts' wife felt comfortable enough, or perhaps angry enough, to physically confront Rick Rude speaks to the complicated dynamics of the wrestling world during that era. The locker room was a place where the boundaries between fiction and reality were constantly being tested, and Rick Rude existed at the center of that tension. By late 1990, frustrated by a pay dispute with Vince McMahon after discovering that the Ultimate Warrior earned more for their matches, Rude left the WWF. It was a decision that would lead him to World Championship Wrestling, where he would achieve even greater championship success, but also where his body would begin to break down in ways that would ultimately prove catastrophic. After a brief period freelancing in smaller promotions and an undefeated run in All Japan Pro Wrestling, Rude made his dramatic return to WCW at Halloween Havoc 1991, unmasking as the WCW Phantom and joining Paul E. Dangerously's Dangerous Alliance, a supergroup that included Medusa, Arn Anderson, Bobby Eaton, Larry Zbyszko, and a young Steve Austin. He captured the WCW United States Heavyweight Championship from Sting on November 19, 1991, holding it for nearly 14 months, the second longest reign in the title's history at that time. His feuds with Ricky Steamboat and Nikita Koloff produced some of the finest matches of his career.
Recently at Fall Brawl, Ravishing Rick Rude made wrestling history, defeating Ric Flair, winning the gold belt, and becoming the World Heavyweight Champion. Our thanks to Ravishing Rick Rude for letting us in your home. Thanks a lot, Rick.
Well, no problem, Tony. You know, that's one thing I think a world champion should do is leave his life open to the public.
In September 1993, Rude defeated Ric Flair at Fall Brawl to win the WCW International World Heavyweight Championship, cementing his status as one of the premier talents in professional wrestling. But his championship reign would be cut short in the most devastating way imaginable. On May 1st, 1994, during a match with Sting at Wrestling Dontaku, Rude suffered a severe back injury from a botched suicide dive onto the entrance ramp. At just 35 years old, his in-ring career was effectively over. The man who had dedicated his entire adult life to professional wrestling was suddenly forced to confront a future without the one thing that had defined him. The aftermath of a catastrophe. For 3 years, Rick Rude existed in a kind of wrestling purgatory. He collected on a Lloyd's of London insurance policy, dealt with ongoing health issues, and watched from the sidelines as the industry he loved continued without him. But in 1997, he returned, first to Extreme Championship Wrestling, where the rules were different, the content was edgier, and the lines between acceptable and unacceptable were blurrier than ever before. It was during this ECW run that an interesting moment was captured. A clip from ECW's Chapter 2 event on May 10, 1997 at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia shows Rude approaching ringside during a tag team match, picking up Francine, Shane Douglas's valet, and carrying her backstage in a highly suggestive manner. The user who reposted it on X captioned it, "Rick Rude casually having a snack during an ECW event." The clip garnered over 18 million views and ignited a firestorm of controversy. Modern viewers, watching through the lens of contemporary standards, found the content inappropriate and emblematic of the outdated, edgy wrestling content that characterized the era. It prompted widespread discussions about the treatment of women in professional wrestling, discussions that continue to this day. But here's where understanding context becomes crucial. This was ECW in 1997. This was a promotion that built its entire brand on pushing boundaries, on being the alternative to the sanitized product offered by the WWF and WCW. The content was designed to shock, to provoke, to make audiences uncomfortable, and Rick Rude, playing a character, was participating in that vision. Does that excuse it? That's not for me to say. But what I can say is that very moment, viewed in isolation, tells only part of the story. It doesn't show you the man who taped over his wedding ring because he refused to pretend, even for a moment, that his marriage didn't matter. It doesn't show you the father who freaked out when a thunderstorm ruined his son's birthday party. It doesn't show you the colleague who, despite his fearsome reputation, was remembered by peers as someone who genuinely cared about the quality of every match he was in.
You know, wrestling, I think I want to say that I beat Rick Rude for the Southern Heavyweight title. Rick was a tremendous wrestler. God, that guy could get heat like no tomorrow, and then he could give you a hell of a comeback. That guy was a total package. Rick Rude was one of the best workers. I mean, golly.
Later in 1997, Rude joined the WWF's D-Generation X faction, helping to form one of the most iconic stables in wrestling history, alongside Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and Chyna. And then, on November 17th, 1997, he did something that had never been done before in the history of professional wrestling. He appeared on both WWF Raw and WCW Monday Nitro on the same night, exploiting the fact that Raw was pre-taped while Nitro was live. It was the ultimate act of defiance against Vince McMahon in the wake of the Montreal Screwjob, and it cemented Rude's legacy as someone who played by his own rules. But the physical toll of his career was catching up with him. In 1998, he faced a health scare initially thought to be testicular cancer, but later identified as a spermatocele. Both the WWF and WCW kept him off television due to injuries, and by April 1999, he had left WCW entirely after contract disputes. The circumstances surrounding what happened next remain, to this day, a subject of intense debate and speculation within the wrestling community.
Now, some people have said that his death was an intentional overdose due to some medical stuff that went wrong. Did you hear any of that?
I heard a little bit about that, but you know, like I said, Rick and I were real tight. So there's, again, you know, wrestling room has 15 rumors for everything that's going on. But yeah, I heard that he had tried to commit suicide prior to it and then tried it again.
On April 20th, 1999, at the age of 40, Rick Rude died in his sleep at his home in Alpharetta, Georgia. The official cause of death was heart failure due to an accidental overdose of mixed medications, including Valium and GHB. He was found by his wife, Michelle. At the time of his death, he had been training for a potential in-ring return. Since his demise, there have been several stories about how he passed, and while the report stated suicide, there were some wrestlers who had significant doubts about it, even though there are claims of depression during Rick's early life. Some of his closest allies have described him as someone who struggled at times with depression and self-consciousness, particularly about his appearance. They claim Rick was often concerned with how he looked and how others perceived him, something that may have contributed to the suicide story.
Were you friendly with him still in later years?
We were friends up until he died. I mean, I went to his funeral when it happened, you know. You put him in a mausoleum, you know. It was a shame to see a guy that young pass away, you know what I mean?
Rick Rude was posthumously inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2017 as part of the Heenan family. It was a recognition that came 18 years too late for him to appreciate in person, but one that acknowledged his undeniable impact on professional wrestling. Tragically, his son Colton died in a motorcycle accident on September 3rd, 2016, at just 19 years old. A reminder that the pain associated with the Rude family didn't end with Rick's death. So what does the resurfaced footage and every other viral clip really change about Rick Rude's life? Perhaps the better question is, what does it reveal about how we view the past? Some of the footage are uncomfortable, no doubt. They represent an era of professional wrestling that in many ways we've rightfully moved beyond, but they also exist within a context that includes a man who was simultaneously one of the toughest individuals in any locker room, and a devoted father who refused to take off his wedding ring. A man who could terrify colleagues with his intensity, but who also felt genuinely terrible when he accidentally accidentally bloodied an opponent.
Rick freaked out because I could see him. Oh my God, oh my God. And I was saying, well, don't have no breakdown. I'm sorry. I said, don't worry, that's okay, brother, don't worry about it. I was bleeding like a goose, man. He just shot. Looked much worse, of course, than it was. I didn't even wind up I could have probably had some stitches, but we just butterflied it up, and then I just got it right there. So, and he apologized, feverishly. I said, don't worry, let's just do a thing. And in the back, he felt so bad. He come around and looked at me, man. He really, Rude was kind of a tough guy,
Rick Rude's legacy is complicated because Rick Rude himself was complicated. He was a product of his time, yes, but he was also ahead of his time in many ways. A performer whose blend of athleticism, charisma, and in-ring psychology influenced generations of wrestlers who came after him. The resurfaced footage and clips don't erase what Rick Rude accomplished. They don't diminish the joy he brought to millions of fans, or the respect he earned from his peers, or the love he showed his family. They only remind us that even our heroes existed in contexts that we might find uncomfortable when viewed through contemporary eyes. And perhaps that's the lesson. Not that we should excuse the past, but that we should understand it. In all its complexity, all its contradiction, all its humanity. Ravishing Rick Rude was many things. A champion, a villain, a family man, a fighter, a friend, and ultimately, a cautionary tale about the physical and emotional toll that professional wrestling extracts from those who dedicate their lives to it. So what are your thoughts on Rick Rude's story? Do you think fame made it difficult for him to ask for help, or did it simply hide the warning signs? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. For more videos like this, click on this next card on your screen.